Okay, now I'm going to talk a little bit about the interest student that I picked in order with my behavior management plan throughout my 10-week student teaching. Um, so the conversations with my CE started out with what student needs a little extra help. What student seems like they're, falling a little behind in behavior-wise in the classroom. We did eventually come to one student who we felt, especially my CE felt, was getting to that third quarter time when they thought that it's coasting time. I can stop following the rules put into place, and actually he had a lot of problems listening, and he had a lot of problems remembering things that were said. I know my CE or I would say something, and 2 minutes later he would be like, hey, what were the directions? What am I supposed to do? Or he would be doing something completely different that he was not even supposed to be working on at the time. And it would be like this shock to him that we were like, why are you working on that? So the conversations that I had with my CE were a lot of along the lines of he really needed a push in listening. He had stopped listening throughout the quarter, and it was something that she had not seen in him in the first 2 quarters, and it was something that we were seeing a lot of come third quarter. So that was really the conversation we had, was she does not have a lot of kids who have major behavior problems. And this kid that we picked was probably the one that needed the help the most. So that's kind of the conversation that we had, was which kid needs help the most? Which kid do we think is kind of falling behind, and the way that they're falling behind is actually harming him in the way that he's acting and working in his schoolwork, and not listening and not following directions is something that was really hindering him from doing what he was supposed to be doing. So once we had chosen that student, I began talking with him before I took over, and I pulled him over, and I wanted to ask him just kind of, how do you think your quarter's going? How do you think following the directions is going? Do you think it's gotten better or worse? And he was just kind of like, I don't know. I think I'm fine. I think I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. He really didn't see that he was doing anything wrong. No matter how many times I called him out or my CE called him out, he didn't realize he was doing anything wrong. And that was a problem. That was an issue. And that was kind of the first conversation that I had with him, was, do you think that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing? And he said yes, he thought he was. And that's where I felt like I needed to start. I needed to kind of show him, hey, this is where you're kind of not doing what you should be, and this is where we need to be. And so those were the early interactions I had with him, the first kind of sit down that I had with him. Why do you think you're doing what you're supposed to? And then from there, we kind of spun into some conversations. Well, what do you think listening in the classroom looks like? And these were just short conversations that I would have with him, maybe 2 to 5 minutes every day. What do you think listening looks like in the classroom? And then we would talk about it. He would say, well, I think it just means listening to the teacher. And I'm like, okay, well, do you often ask your teacher what the directions were? Well, yes, sometimes I don't hear her. And I'm like, do you think that's what you're supposed to be doing? And he would often say no. And that's when it was like, okay, good. You know what the rules are. You know that you're supposed to be listening, and you should not have to ask for directions again. So we kind of went from there. That's where the conversation led. We started with, hey, do you know if you are doing something you're not supposed to, or do you think you're doing everything right? After that, I developed this interest survey. And for me, with my student, it was a verbal interest survey. So this was something that I did verbally with him. I pulled him aside, I asked him questions, and I wrote down answers. And that's going to be in my evidence on this page. So you'll be able to see the questions that I asked and the answers that he gave. And the biggest reason for this was because the student that I chose is an English language learner. He can speak English and he can understand it very well, but sometimes writing is very difficult for him. Sometimes writing takes a lot longer for him, and we would have been there a lot longer, and I feel like the interaction between us, me actually asking him questions and him talking to me, I got more out of it. And that was something that I had researched I had gone online and looked up different surveys, and I talked to my CE a lot about what she thought I should do with him. And we both she was really the driving force in this. She was the one that helped me really kind of see what I should do with this student. And she said, I really think that you should just sit down and talk with him. You can give him any survey that you want, and you can find out his interests, find out his likes, dislikes, what kind of culture he has, and all of that. But really, you want to sit down with him and talk with him, because you're going to find out so much more, and he's going to talk more than he would write, or he's going to talk more than he would have to put answers down, even if I was saying them out loud. And so we came to the conclusion that I would verbalize the interest survey. And then that's when we actually sat down and I came up with some questions on my own. And I did this after looking at a lot of student interest surveys. And I decided I wanted to ask specific questions for this student. I wanted to ask him where he was from, because he was not from the United States. I wanted to ask him about his culture, about his background. I wanted to ask him about how he liked living here in North Carolina. And then I definitely wanted to ask him, what kind of things do you think are expected of you in the classroom? What kind of rules do you think are expected? And then from there, that actually kind of got to spiral, and I was like, okay, let's look at what you are doing and how we can fix that. And it turns out, it was really cool, the stuff that I found out. A lot of the stuff culturally was just different. There's a lot of stuff he was not used to doing. And for example, I'll give you one. A lot of the times when he would get in trouble, or when he was not doing what he was supposed to do in line, I would stop him and I would say, hey, you need to not be, getting out of line or running in front of everybody, or whatever the behavior was that he was doing. And I would pull him aside, and while he was looking at me, he was smirking. He had just had this smirk on his face, like he thought it was the funniest thing in the world that he was in trouble. And I was always so confused, like why he had this smirk on his face. And I would say, hey, that's disrespectful. And with this survey, I actually found out, we kind of got into a conversation about that. And he was able to tell me that, where he's from, that was not disrespectful. He says smiling was actually something that they wanted to see a lot, especially when you're in trouble, because it was just a different way of thinking where he was from. And I go more on about that in the survey. You can read that in the survey. But it was really cool finding out some of this stuff and being like, okay, so it's not really, sometimes he's not trying to be he's not trying to misbehave, but he's really just doing what he thinks he's supposed to. So that was really cool to find out. It says, describe the implementation of the interest survey with the students. So what I learned a lot of cool things. And what surprised me, the thing that surprised me the most was the cultural difference, and the way that he truly thought that some of the things he was doing was fine in the classroom. And no matter how many times we would say it, it's kind of like something that's been drilled into your brain for so long. It's hard. It's hard to change that, especially in 5th grade. It's hard to change what you think is right. If he's taught his whole life that smiling when he's in trouble is okay, and that he actually should do it because that's more respectful, it's hard, even if I'm going to tell him 100 times, it's hard for him to change that, because it's just in his mind. There would be times after I explained it to him where I would stop him and say, hey, you're smiling at me while you're in trouble, and he'd be like, oh, I'm sorry, and he would fix it. But it was because it was finally explained to him why that was wrong. And that was really just the biggest surprise, was that it was just a big cultural difference. And a lot of that, what I learned from the survey was A, the cultural difference, and B, I learned a lot that even though he could speak English, and even though he could write English and understand English, it seemed that English was still a barrier. And that was one of the reasons that he had a hard time listening and he had a hard time following instructions, was sometimes the directions were given and he would just get caught up on the first part of them, and he wouldn't be able to remember, or he wouldn't understand, and instead of asking, he would just try and do something, and oftentimes it wasn't the right thing to do. And so that's kind of what I learned from that, which was also a really cool thing to learn. I realized, okay, well, there's there is a language barrier there. So that's something that I also need to address. So then, from there, my CE and I sat down and we decided we were going to have a weekly work habits and conduct report for this student. Not only that, but when I gave directions, I would give them to the class, and then I would write them down for this specific student to read, and he was able to do things a lot better. But we would also have a weekly habits and conduct report, and basically, it's this report right here. It's going to be posted on my evidences as part of this page. But so what this has on it, it has 10 boxes. It's using time wisely, is attentive and listens, completes assignments, works independently and seeks help when needed, because that was a big one, follows directions, writes legibly, completes homework, is cooperative, and shows respect for others and observes the rules. Those were the things that we were looking for, and those were the things that she and I decided. I talked with her a lot, and I was thinking, well, really only a few of these things we need to focus on, but she wanted to emphasize that all of these things are an expectation, no matter what. And hopefully that would clear the air with some of the confusion he was having with the rules, which I thought was an excellent idea. It seemed like he kind of wasn't understanding the expectations that were his, the expectations that were given. And so instead of putting down 3 or 4 things that we really that were the main problems, we put down all of the expectations, or a good chunk of them, because we wanted him to see that and prevent any other major behavior problems in the classroom, which I thought was an amazing thing. What this work habits and conduct report is every Friday I would fill it out. I would give him a grade 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, or 3. That is the way that we grade in Wake County. On a standards-based grading system. So I give him a 1, 2, or 3. 3 meant he met that requirement for the week. 2 meant he struggled with it. 1 meant he completely didn't meet that requirement. And then under the comments section, I would fill out reasons why he was not meeting certain requirements. And so if I would put a 2 or if I would put a 1, I would comment and say, this is why you're not meeting these expectations. This is what needs to change. And a parent would have to sign every week. So I would do it on Friday, it would go home on Monday, and he would have Tuesday and Wednesday to bring it back in. And then a parent would have to sign it. And if the parent did not sign it, or if it was not brought back, that was when we would contact the parents to make sure that they saw the form and that they sent it back to us. And then they were able to request a conference. And so the parents actually emailed my CE a couple of times, just making sure he was doing what he was supposed to. They never requested a conference, but they did want to make sure he was staying on track after a week where he got a grade that they didn't like so much. So the parents were involved, my CE was involved, I was involved, and it was just a really cool way to collaborate with all of those people. So before we finalized all of this, I did go back with the student interest survey, and I went back and I said, okay, let's look at your answers that you gave me here. And I would say, this is what I feel like we need to work on, and these are the other expectations of the class. Do you think this is going to help you? And I let him look over the work habits and conduct report, and he decided that it did. He said, I think that's good. I think I can meet those expectations. And I said, are you sure? Is there anything? And so we kind of worked through the interests plan, and I went step by step. What does each one of these mean? Okay, uses time wisely. That means that you are doing your work at your desk when you need to be, or doing your work with a group, or doing your work at the computer. And when you're finished, you have done your best work, and then you are working on something else. You are not sitting there doing nothing. Okay, you are figuring out what the next assignment you need to work on is, or you're reading independently. Okay, those are your options. You should never be doing nothing. And so I explained that to him, and then we went, all right, let's go to the next one. Is attentive and listens. What does that one mean? Okay, that one means that you need to listen to what I'm saying, the instructions I'm giving, and you should hear them the first time. You should not have to ask, Ms. Grubb, what was it that you said again? What were those directions? What am I supposed to be doing? And because because I knew that he had trouble with that language barrier, and because I knew he had trouble culturally, that is why we sat down and I went through each one and I said, okay, let's go through each one. Let's talk about what I expect, and let's talk about why this is a rule and an expectation. And because of that, he kind of got the understanding of, okay, I know what's expected of me. I understand it, and that was pretty cool too. So that was the planning process of the implementation of the behavior management system that I used with that one specific kid. The next video I'm going to talk about the effectiveness of it, what worked, what didn't work, and what I might have changed. But that was the plan, and together, my CE and myself, and even the student, we thought that this was a good plan for him. So yeah.